Have you ever caught yourself saying something that felt true in the moment, only to realize later that it wasn't quite accurate? Or maybe you've noticed that one friend who genuinely believes their own version of events, even when everyone else remembers it differently. Well, if you're an INFJ or know one closely, you might be nodding your head right now. Here's the thing, INFJs don't set out to deceive anyone. They're actually one of the most authentic personality types out there. But there's this strange paradox where they end up lying to themselves and others without even realizing they're doing it. Sounds crazy, right? Stick around because we're about to dive deep into the psychology behind this phenomenon, and trust me, it's going to blow your mind. The idealistic filter that distorts reality. Let's talk about one of the biggest reasons INFJs end up lying to themselves, their idealism. Now, don't get me wrong, having ideals isn't a bad thing. It's what drives INFJs to want to make the world a better place. But when you're constantly viewing life through rose-colored glasses, you're bound to miss some of the grittier details. INFJs have this vision of how things should be. They see the potential in people, situations, and relationships. When they meet someone new, they don't just see who that person is right now, they see who that person could become. It's beautiful, really, but it's also dangerous. Here's what happens. An INFJ meets someone who's showing red flags left and right. Maybe this person is unreliable or they got a history of letting people down. But the INFJ focuses on those few moments of genuine connection, those glimpses of potential. In their mind, they start constructing a narrative. This person is just misunderstood. They've been hurt before, so they put up walls. But deep down, they're really caring and capable of change. And guess what? The INFJ genuinely believes this story. They're not consciously lying to themselves. Their brain has literally filtered out the contradicting evidence and focused on the parts that fit their ideal vision. When friends try to warn them, the INFJ might even defend this person passionately because to them, what they're saying feels completely true. This doesn't just apply to people either. INFJs do this with jobs, life paths, and their own capabilities. They'll convince themselves that a toxic work environment is a growth opportunity or that they're fine when they're actually burnt out to a crisp. The harmony-seeking nature that bends truth. Now let's get into another major factor, the INFJ's desperate need for harmony. These folks are feeling types, which means they make decisions based on values and emotions rather than cold, hard logic. And one of their core values is maintaining connection, avoiding conflict. Here's the thing, reality is messy. People disagree. Feelings get hurt. Conflicts happen. But INFJs often can't stand this messiness. It literally causes them emotional pain to be in situations where there's discord or tension. So what do? They smooth things over, sometimes at the expense of complete honesty. Picture this. An INFJ's friend asks, "Do you think I'm being unreasonable about this situation?" The INFJ might actually think, "Yeah, you're totally overreacting and you're not seeing the other person's perspective at all." But they won't say that. Instead, they'll say something like, "Well, I can definitely see why you'd feel that way. Your feelings are totally valid." Now, is that a lie? Not exactly. The INFJ does understand why their friend feels that way. That's their superpower. But are they being completely honest? No. They're giving a partial truth, carefully curated to maintain harmony and avoid hurting their friend's feelings. The wild part? After a while, the INFJ starts to believe their own diplomatic version of events. Their mind goes, "I said their feelings were valid, so maybe they're not actually overreacting. Maybe I'm the one who's wrong." They gaslight themselves into accepting a version of reality that prioritizes harmony over honesty. The future-focused mind that forgets the present. INFJs are dominated by a cognitive function called introverted intuition, or an I for short. This function is all about seeing patterns, making connections, and focusing on future possibilities. It's what gives INFJs their almost psychic-like ability to predict how things will unfold. But there's a downside to being so future-focused. The present moment becomes kind of blurry. Think about it like this. When you're driving and you're focused on a destination that's miles away, the landscape right in front of you becomes less important. You're not paying attention to every tree and building you pass. You're thinking about where you're going. INFJs do this with their lives. They're so focused on the future, on their goals, their vision, their ideal outcome, that they sometimes miss or misremember what's actually happening right now. They might tell someone, "I'm handling everything fine," while their present reality includes sleepless nights, stress eating, and avoiding phone calls. But because they can see a future where things are better, that future feels more real to them than their current struggle. This also messes with their memory. INFJs might genuinely remember a conversation or event differently than it happened because their intuition has already processed it, filtered it, and stored it based on the meaning they extracted from it rather than the actual facts. It's not intentional deception, it's just how their brain works. The private nature that creates alternate realities. Here's something most people don't understand about INFJs. They're incredibly private. Like Fort Knox level private. They'll be your best friend, your confidant, the person who knows all your secrets. But good luck getting them to share their deepest struggles with you. This privacy creates a weird situation where the INFJ presents one version of themselves to the world while experiencing something completely different internally. And here's the kicker. They do it so consistently that they start to believe their own facade. An INFJ might be going through a brutal breakup, questioning their entire life path and feeling completely lost. But if you ask them how they're doing, they'll smile and say, "I'm good. Just keeping busy." They're not trying to deceive you. They genuinely feel like they shouldn't burden others with their problems. They've told themselves so many times that they're fine, that they've almost convinced themselves it's true. This creates two parallel realities. There's the external reality, the composed, insightful, helpful INFJ that everyone knows. And there's the internal reality, the overwhelmed, uncertain, emotionally exhausted person that nobody sees. The INFJ themselves starts to lose track of which one is real. When someone finally gets close enough to see the cracks in the facade, the INFJ might even feel shocked, like, "Oh, I guess I haven't been doing as well as I thought." It's a moment of truth that can feel jarring because they've been lying to themselves about their own state of being. The empathy overload that confuses boundaries. INFJs are empaths in the truest sense. They don't just sympathize with others, they literally absorb other people's emotions. When you're sad, they feel sad. When you're anxious, they feel anxious. It's like they're emotional sponges soaking up everything around them. Now, this makes them incredible friends and counselors. But it also creates a massive problem. They often can't distinguish between their own feelings and someone else's feelings. And when you can't tell where you end and another person begins, truth becomes really complicated. Imagine an INFJ spending time with a friend who's going through a divorce. The friend is angry, hurt, and feels betrayed. The INFJ, being deeply empathetic, absorbs all of those emotions. Later that day, someone asks the INFJ, "How are you feeling?" The INFJ might respond with genuine frustration and talk about feeling betrayed. But those aren't actually their emotions. They've taken on their friend's emotional experience and mistaken it for their own. This gets even more complex in romantic relationships. An INFJ might be dating someone who has a very specific vision for their future together. Through constant exposure and emotional absorption, the INFJ starts to adopt that vision as their own. They'll talk about wanting the same things, making the same plans, having the same dreams. But if you corner them and really dig deep, they might realize, wait, is this what I actually want? Or is this what my partner wants? They're not deliberately lying. They genuinely believe they want these things because they felt their partner's emotions so strongly that the lines have blurred completely. The perfectionism that rewrites history. Let's talk about INFJ perfectionism because boy, is it a thing. INFJs don't just want to be good. They want to be the best version of themselves. They want to live up to their own impossibly high standards. And when they inevitably fall short, their brain does something really interesting. It rewrites the story. Say an INFJ loses their temper during an argument. Maybe they said something harsh that they regret. Now INFJs pride themselves on being patient, understanding, and emotionally mature. So when they behave in a way that contradicts this self-image, it creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, a mental discomfort that comes from holding two conflicting beliefs. To resolve this discomfort, the INFJ's brain might adjust their memory of the event. Over time, they might remember the situation as, well, I was firm, but I wasn't mean. I just stood up for myself. They'll downplay their own behavior and emphasize the other person's provocations. It's not a conscious choice, it's their brain protecting their self-image. This happens with their accomplishments too. INFJs often struggle to accept their successes because they're always comparing themselves to their ideal vision of perfection. They might achieve something significant, get a promotion, finish a creative project, help someone through a crisis, but then minimize it by saying, oh, anyone could have done that. It wasn't that big of a deal. They're lying to themselves about their own value and capabilities because acknowledging their success would mean accepting that they're not perfect and never will be. It's easier to rewrite the story as not that impressive than to sit with the uncomfortable truth that they're good enough, even with their flaws. The symbolic thinking that misses literal truth. INFJs are symbolic thinkers. They're constantly looking for deeper meanings, hidden messages, and metaphorical significance. A simple conversation isn't just a conversation. It's loaded with subtext and significance. This is part of what makes them such deep, thoughtful people. But it also means they sometimes miss the literal, surface-level truth of situations. Here's an example. An INFJ's boss sends them an email that says, "Can we talk tomorrow?" A more literal-minded person might think, "Okay, my boss wants to discuss something." But the INFJ's brain immediately goes into symbolic interpretation mode. "Can we talk? That sounds serious. Maybe I'm in trouble. Or maybe they're going to give me more responsibility because they trust me. Or maybe the company is downsizing and they're going to let me go." By the time tomorrow comes, the INFJ has constructed an entire narrative in their mind. And when the actual conversation happens, let's say the boss just wanted to ask about scheduling preferences, the INFJ might still walk away feeling like there was more to it than what was said. They'll read between the lines, analyze the boss's tone, and convince themselves there's a hidden agenda. This symbolic thinking means INFJs are constantly interpreting reality through layers of meaning rather than just accepting things at face value. And when they share these interpretations with others, they genuinely believe they're speaking the truth. To them, the subtext and symbolism are just as real, if not more real, than the actual words spoken. The people-pleasing tendency that shapeshifts identity. INFJs are notorious people-pleasers, though they'd probably hate admitting it. They have this chameleon-like ability to adapt to different people and situations. With one friend, they're the silly, light-hearted companion. With another, they're the serious intellectual. In one setting, they're the caring nurturer. In another, they're the ambitious go-getter. This adaptability is a strength in many ways. It helps them connect with diverse types of people and navigate complex social situations. But here's the problem. After a while, they lose track of who they really are. They've played so many different roles that they no longer have a clear sense of their authentic self. An INFJ might tell one person, "I'm really into spontaneous adventures and trying new things, because that's what that friend values." Then they'll tell another person, "I prefer routine and predictability, because that's what resonates with that relationship." Both statements feel true in the moment because the INFJ has temporarily become that version of themselves. But which one is the real INFJ? The answer is both and neither. They've fragmented their identity into so many pieces that they can't give a straight answer about who they are or what they want. When they're alone, they might feel completely lost, like an actor who doesn't know who they are when they step off the stage. This isn't intentional deception. The INFJ genuinely experiences themselves differently depending on their environment. But it means they're constantly telling different truths to different people, and all those truths contradict each other. The intuitive leaps that bypass evidence. Remember how we talked about INFJs being intuitive? Well, their intuition is so strong that it sometimes makes them skip right over the evidence-gathering stage of understanding. They have these powerful gut feelings and sudden insights that feel absolutely certain. And when something feels that certain, they accept it as truth without fact-checking it. An INFJ might meet someone and immediately think, "This person is trustworthy. I can tell." They don't need to see proof or wait for the person to demonstrate reliability over time. Their intuition told them, so it must be true. Then, if that person later betrays their trust, the INFJ is genuinely shocked because their intuition was so convincing. This also happens with their own life decisions. An INFJ might quit a stable job to pursue a creative passion because their intuition screams, "This is your path." They'll tell everyone with absolute confidence that this is the right move, that they've never been more certain of anything, and they believe it completely. But intuition, no matter how strong, isn't the same as truth. It's a hunch, a possibility, a feeling. Sometimes it's incredibly accurate, and sometimes it leads you completely astray. INFJs struggle to make this distinction because their intuitive hits feel like divine revelations rather than educated guesses. When they share these intuitive insights with others, they present them as facts. "I know this is going to work out. I can tell that person doesn't have good intentions. This opportunity is meant for me." They're not lying on purpose. They genuinely can't distinguish between a strong intuitive feeling and verified truth. The emotional truth versus factual truth dilemma. Here's one of the most important things to understand about INFJs and truth. They prioritize emotional truth over factual truth. To an INFJ, something doesn't need to be factually accurate to be true. It just needs to feel true to capture the essence of an experience or situation. Let me give you an example. An INFJ might tell a story about their childhood, saying something like, "My parents were never home. I basically raised myself." Now, if you fact-check this, you might find that their parents were actually home quite a bit. But what the INFJ is expressing is the emotional truth of their experience. They felt alone, unsupported, and like they had to figure things out on their own. To the INFJ, The emotional truth is more important than whether their parents were physically present 50% of the time versus 20% of the time. They're not trying to exaggerate or deceive, they're trying to communicate how something felt, which to them is the deepest form of truth. This creates confusion for more literally minded people who hear these statements and take them at face value. But it also creates confusion for the INFJ themselves, because they've told the emotional version of the story so many times that they start to remember it as factual truth. This emotional truth prioritization extends to how they view other people too. An INFJ might describe someone as the most generous person I've ever met, based on one or two emotionally significant experiences with that person, even if objectively that person isn't particularly generous overall. The emotional impact of those moments made it feel true, so it becomes the INFJ's reality. The exhaustion that creates mental shortcuts. Being an INFJ is exhausting. No, seriously, it's mentally and emotionally draining to constantly absorb everyone's emotions, analyze every situation for deeper meaning, maintain harmony in all your relationships, and hold yourself to impossible standards, all while keeping your true feelings locked away behind that private, composed exterior. When INFJs get exhausted, and they get exhausted often, their brains start taking shortcuts. They don't have the energy to carefully examine their thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, so they start accepting whatever their brain tells them without question. And an exhausted brain? It's not exactly reliable. An overtired INFJ might catastrophize, turning a small problem into an enormous crisis in their mind. Then they'll share this catastrophic interpretation with others as if it's objective reality. Everything's falling apart. Nothing's working out. They genuinely believe this in the moment because they don't have the mental energy to step back and assess the situation more accurately. Exhaustion also makes them more susceptible to cognitive distortions. Those mental traps like black and white thinking, overgeneralization, and emotional reasoning. An exhausted INFJ thinks, I failed at this one thing, so I'm a complete failure. And they'll tell themselves and others this lie without recognizing it as the cognitive distortion it is. The problem is that INFJs push themselves to exhaustion regularly. It's part of their nature to give and give until they're completely depleted. So they're operating in this state of mental fog more often than they'd like to admit, which means they're accepting and spreading these exhaustion-fueled half-truths constantly. The door-slamming defense that revises relationships. Let's talk about the infamous INFJ door slam. For those who don't know, this is when an INFJ suddenly and completely cuts someone out of their life. No explanation, no second chances, just boom, you're gone. But here's what's relevant to our topic. When an INFJ door slams someone, they often rewrite the entire history of that relationship in their mind. A person who was once my best friend becomes someone who was always toxic, but I didn't see it. All the good memories get filtered out and all the negative aspects get magnified. The INFJ genuinely believes this revised version of history. If you ask them about the relationship months or years later, they might say things like, I always knew something was off about them, or they never really cared about me. These statements feel completely true to the INFJ, but they're not accurate reflections of the full relationship. They're post hoc justifications for the door slam. This revision serves a psychological purpose. It protects the INFJ from feeling guilty about cutting someone off. INFJs value their relationships deeply, so to end one completely, they need to convince themselves it was absolutely necessary and justified. Their brain cooperates by highlighting all the evidence that supports this decision and minimizing anything that contradicts it. The lie isn't intentional, but it's a lie nonetheless. A simplified, black and white version of what was probably a more complex, nuanced relationship. The helper identity that denies personal needs. INFJs often build their entire identity around being helpful, insightful, and there for others. They're the friend everyone calls in a crisis. The coworker who stays late to help with projects. The family member who mediates every conflict. This helper identity feels good, it gives them purpose and makes them feel valuable. But here's the lie they tell themselves constantly. I don't need help. I'm fine handling things on my own. They'll insist they're self-sufficient even when they're drowning. They'll say they prefer to process things independently, even when they desperately need support. This isn't just a white lie to maintain appearances. The INFJ genuinely believes it. They've spent so long in the helper role that they've convinced themselves they don't have the same needs as everyone else. When someone offers help, they'll refuse it automatically, telling themselves and others that they've got it handled. Meanwhile, internally, they're struggling with anxiety, burnout, health issues, or emotional overwhelm. But acknowledging those struggles would contradict their helper identity, so they ignore them. They lie to themselves about their own needs until those needs become impossible to ignore, usually in the form of a breakdown or health crisis. When that breakdown comes, the INFJ is often genuinely surprised. I don't know what happened. I thought I was fine. They weren't fine. They were just so committed to the lie of self-sufficiency that they believe their own story. The meaning-making that invents narratives. INFJs can't stand when things feel meaningless or random. They need life to make sense, to have purpose, to fit into a larger narrative. So when something happens that doesn't fit their understanding, a tragedy, a betrayal, a failure, they create meaning where there might not be any. They'll say things like, "This happened for a reason," or "I was meant to learn this lesson," or "The universe is redirecting me toward my true path." These narratives aren't based on evidence. They're based on the INFJ's need to make sense of their experiences. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with finding meaning in difficult situations. It's actually a healthy coping mechanism. But the problem arises when the INFJ starts to believe these invented narratives are objective truth rather than comforting interpretations. An INFJ might tell someone, "I'm glad that relationship ended because I wasn't meant to be with that person. I'm supposed to meet someone else who aligns better with my purpose." This story feels true and provides comfort. But the factual truth might simply be that the relationship ended because both people had incompatibilities and different goals. No cosmic purpose required. By constantly creating these meaning-laden narratives, INFJs live in a world that's partly fiction, partly truth, and they can't always tell the difference. When they share these stories with others, they're not lying intentionally, they're sharing what feels like profound truth to them. Conclusion. So here's the bottom line. INFJs lie to themselves and others without knowing it because their entire cognitive setup predisposes them to prioritize meaning over facts, harmony over honesty, potential over reality, and emotional truth over literal truth. They filter every experience through layers of intuition, idealism, empathy, and symbolic interpretation until the original truth is almost unrecognizable. But here's the thing, this isn't some fatal flaw. It's part of what makes INFJs who they are. Their ability to see deeper meanings, to believe in people's potential, to create harmony, and to find purpose in chaos is beautiful. The world needs people who think this way. The key isn't to stop being an INFJ or to fundamentally change how their brain works. The key is awareness. When INFJs understand these patterns in themselves, they can start to catch themselves in the act. They can pause before sharing an intuitive insight as if it's verified fact. They can question their own narratives and interpretations. They can acknowledge, "This is how I'm experiencing this situation, but I recognize my experience might not be the complete picture." And for those of you who love an INFJ, whether it's a friend, partner, or family member, understanding these patterns can help you have more compassion when their version of events doesn't match yours. They're not gaslighting you on purpose. They're not trying to manipulate you. They genuinely see the world through a different lens, and to them what they're saying is true. The truth is complicated, messy, and multifaceted. And maybe, just maybe, we need people like INFJs who remind us that there's more to truth than just facts. There's meaning, feeling, and possibility too. The challenge is finding the balance between honoring that perspective and staying grounded in shared reality. So next time you catch yourself or your INFJ friend bending the truth without realizing it, take a breath. Remember that this comes from a place of trying to make sense of a confusing world, not from malicious intent. And maybe, just maybe, there's something to learn from seeing reality through their eyes, even if it's not always perfectly accurate. Thanks for sticking with me through this deep dive. If you're an INFJ, I hope this gave you some insight into your own patterns. And if you love an INFJ, I hope this helped you understand them a little better. Either way, remember, we're all just trying to figure out this complicated thing called truth, and none of us have it completely figured out.